everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Lens of Bias. Uh, I almost forgot that I had the scheduled time to be with you today. I was out in the yard playing with my dog because it's a beautiful day here in Chicago. Anyway, so Breaking the Lens of Bias is where I talk about different things and may relating to critical thinking and how we can break those biases that we hold in various aspects of our life. And oftentimes I will bring in a real life example of something that's happening in today or in the recent past about to illustrate that as an example of how you can break your own biases. So my apologies for being a bit late, but I'm glad to be here today. So today I'm talking about fast thinking and slow thinking. And you might ask the question, what is fast thinking? What is slow thinking? What do you mean by that, Kat? And what I usually say is fast thinking tends to be that initial intuitive thinking, oftentimes a reaction to whatever stimuli we may have, a gut reaction to a situation. It might be a fight or flight kind of situation. It could also be very familiar tasks, like driving. When we first learned how to drive, we had to really pay attention and make sure that we were doing everything correctly. And as we drive more and more and more, many of those things become fast thinking because we don't have to invest the mental energy in it. We already know what to do. Slow thinking is something where it is more intentional. It is it can have reasoning and logic behind it. Um, it's requires effort. It requires both asking and answering questions. Um, it doesn't it's not a snap judgment on something. It's often it requires that extra thought and saying, what's really going on here? So where do we see fast thinking? Well, I'll give you one episode example of driving. Um, Another example, or we'll use driving again as an example. You're driving along and things are going fine, and you see the person in front of you brake immediately. You're going and you're reacting. So part of it is autopilot because you see brake lights, you know you need to brake. But the other part of it is, oh my God, if I don't brake, I'm going to hit that car in front of me. So your instinct is not just to brake, but to really brake, really press your foot down to that pedal to make sure that you engage the brakes on your car to stop as quickly as possible so that you don't crash. Um, there are other kinds of things where you're in an emergency situation and you react to that situation immediately, um, where it may not fix the problem, and it might have an error to it or something like that, but you're reacting to the immediate situation. So I'm thinking of a situation. I'll say a situation that happened to me once. It's been a while that this happened, and oftentimes we don't know what to do in a situation. I encountered a person as I was on my way to work crossing a busy street, and a person had an um, went into a grand mal seizure, and so the immediate reaction, my immediate reaction was some other people got to the person first. My reaction was, because this was in the middle of a busy street, right in the crosswalk, was to stop traffic. So I stood up and was stopping traffic to do that. I didn't think about the consequences of that. Would I get hit? Would somebody, hit the other people? What could I do? My immediate reaction was to make sure that the person who was having the seizure and the people who were attending them were safe. Now, some of the things they say you were supposed to do or you're not supposed to do, the people didn't know what to do. They just wanted to render aid. Um, and so I've since learned, having a niece who has epilepsy, and I kind of read up on some of that stuff and the things to do concerning that. Was as I was standing in the street and kind of watching what was going on and stopping cars, I noticed that some of the things they didn't do were appropriate aid to a person who was in the middle of a seizure. Um, and so, now knowing that, I could be like, oh, okay. But I could also understand why they did what they did in that moment to to try and render aid to that person. So sometimes we think we know what may be best in a particular situation based on our experience. But if we don't have experience in that particular situation, we may or we may not be doing the best service to that person. That is that fast thinking. Oh my God, this is happening. I need to react. Um, and I mean, again, that's kind of one of the things is we look for a pattern. Well, in the past, when somebody has had a medical condition or something, we've rendered aid, or we've seen it on television, or we've heard about it in this way, um, but we don't really know. We think we know based on patterns that we've seen before. So it's emotional, it's intuitive, it's kind of what you feel in the gut that you need to do. Um, it could be very familiar. You could take shortcuts to try and deal with the problem as quickly as possible, depending on the situation. But how do so these are things, events that happen. How does this happen in our thinking? Well, let's take hot button issues. So if you were, let's take the gun issue, and I'm not going to come down on either side, but a lot of times when people say something about guns, it falls on one of two sides. One is, you ain't taking my guns, and the other side is, we need to get rid of all guns. And this is a complex problem in a number of issues. So our initial thought is we have to react in this way, and we need to do something. And yeah, we need to do something, but what is that to do? So you take that kind of reaction that you have on a hot button societal issue, and it comes down on that either way through what you've learned or what your opinions are, and you don't think the issues through. Take abortion, for example. When people say, absolutely, in no cases whatsoever, but then you start putting these other things in there. Well, what about this? And what about that? And I was reading this morning about a case in Texas where a woman almost died. Her water broke at 19 weeks. There was no way that the fetus would have been viable, and but the doctors were afraid to treat her, and she actually got life-threatening sepsis, and was in intensive care and almost died. Luckily, they were able to save her life, but the repercussions of that was, not only did she have to go through that, and the baby was stillborn, because they waited until then, because the sepsis had set in by that point, and they didn't do anything to do it. They let the baby be stillborn. And then, she had this sepsis, had this thing. It actually affected her ability to bear children in the future. And so when you talk about cases like that with the specific details, are we doing the right thing? We have medical knowledge that will, a certain death of the fetus has occurred or is going to occur, because we don't have the medical technology yet to save a fetus at 19 weeks. Then do we let that woman suffer? Do we let that woman have permanent harm? Do we possibly, by our inaction, cause the death of the woman who has a family and may have other children? And so in the sense is our belief of not taking a life, or not performing a procedure because the life was already, in a sense, taken. Do we have that strict kind of view? So again, I'm asking the questions. I'm not falling down on either side, but I think you know where I'm going with that, and that's the slow thinking. It takes the situation, it takes the issue, and it's a complex issue, and looks at the moral implications and the ramifications of decisions that we can make to do that. And so when we look at things like that and that slow thinking, and we get out of the fast thinking, and the fast thinking has its place, it certainly does. We wouldn't be able to react to emergency situations if we didn't have the fast thinking. We would get caught up in that. But with the slow thinking, when we're talking about complex issues, something that doesn't need to be decided right away, um, we need to step back and say, wait a minute, I need to have self-control. I can't let my emotional beliefs override the rational beliefs. I need to take the time to listen to other people's opinions. I need time to assess all the facts of a situation before I make a simple snap judgment. So ask yourself, and this is kind of what I do, is when I get an initial gut reaction about something, whether it be one of the hot button issues of the day, and a news item has come out concerning the hot button issue of the day and how that falls, whether it be guns or abortion or a number of other issues. Do I take the time to step back and to say, what is really going on here? And then how can I come to a reasonably logical conclusion, taking into account the facts on the various aspects of this issue and the various opinions of this issue. And when we can do that, I believe that's when we can actually work towards problems. I believe that's where we can come to a place of understanding rather than a place of conflict. But it requires that critical thinking on your part, not the initial gut thinking. So when I get that feeling and this is my reaction, I have to check myself. Okay, why am I feeling this? Why is this evoking such an emotion in me? Because the fast thinking is often very, very emotional in issues like that. And so when I take that step back and I say, okay, where is this? One of the questions I'll often ask is, what is the lived experience of someone else? So if I'm talking about an issue for concerning someone whose experience is very different from mine, I would want to hear and listen to their lived experience, because that will give me a frame of reference to come back to possibly relate it to an experience of my own in some kind of way. Or it allows me to have empathy for that. Oh, I didn't think of that. That's so far removed from my experience. I can't even really imagine that scenario. But the power of that storytelling and the power of listening and trying to place yourself into that person's point of view and understanding the complexity of the belief, and it's not just, again, a black and white thing. It has to do with that lived experience. You can be more reasonable, you can be more logical, you can be more empathetic and come to that. Kind of another thing, a little aside about slow thinking is, remember, whenever you're learning something new, it requires a much slower task. I was only a couple minutes late today to this. I have to set up my equipment and take it down because I do live streaming outside of the house. And so I hadn't set up my equipment yet for this week. It was still in the bag from earlier when I had taken it out. But I've done it so many times, I know how to set it up, and it's very quick for me to set it up now. It just takes me about 5 minutes or so in my home to set things up. When I first started this, it took me much longer. It took me about a half an hour to get in, and I had to test everything, and I had to make sure that it was okay. Now I kind of know, and I have my mental checklist. Okay, this, and this. And so the slow thinking happens when we're learning tasks, again, like the driving. The fast thinking helps when we know it, we understand it, we've mastered it. So we don't need to, we've used the slow thinking to get to the point where fast thinking can work. So these are just some interesting kinds of things. But again, I'll challenge you when you're, as it relates more to biases and things like that, is to ask yourself, how am I feeling about something? Am I having fast thinking, coming to opinion about something, or am I taking the time to actually think about the issue, consider other sides, and come to a more reasonable, logical conclusion rather than a gut reaction? And I'll give you a caveat though. The reasonable, logical conclusion may coincide with your gut reaction. It may not. But that check is super important to break any biases that you may have and to be a sound, critical thinker. So I think that will be it for today. As always, I love your comments. I'd like to thank my friend John for commenting on last week's, and I still have to get back to you on some of the questions that you raised. I have not forgotten. I've just been very busy this week, and I will get back to you. But please place comments. If you have something that you'd like to talk about, a specific topic, or any of the ideas presented here, please feel free to say something. You could come on as a guest, or I will be more than willing to go ahead and answer those things either in chat or online. But just please comment and like the page if you haven't. I'm here every week, and I will see you next week on another episode of Breaking the Lens of Bias. Again, my name's Kat Killian. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.